The August sun was a warm hand on the back of Lena's neck. It was her 20-minute break, a sacred interval in a 10-hour shift, and she was spending it on the cracked stone patio behind, the daily grind. Her lunch was half a baguette, bought for $1 from the bakery next door. It wasn't much, but the crust was perfect and it was hers. She closed her eyes, letting the city's hum wash over her. The distant wail of a siren, the clatter of plates from the kitchen, the murmur of conversations from the tables out front. This was her world. Simple, ordered, predictable. That was the moment she felt eyes on her. Not the casual glance of a passerby, but a stare. Fixed. Intense. She opened her own. A little boy was standing near the wrought iron gate that separated the alley from the street. He couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, with a mop of jet black hair falling into his eyes. He wore a bright red t-shirt and denim jeans, clothes that seemed too clean for the grime of the city alley. He was just watching her, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked profoundly, devastatingly lost. Lena's heart gave a soft, painful tug. She knew that look. It was the look of a world tilted off its axis. She'd worn it herself once or twice. She broke off a piece of her baguette. "Hey," she said softly, her voice calm so as not to spook him. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer. He just watched her, his dark eyes wide and unblinking. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He was drawn not by her words, but by the bread in her hand. Hunger was a universal language. "You hungry?" she asked, holding the piece out. "It's good. Got it fresh this morning." He crept closer, a tiny ship navigating a vast, unknown ocean. When he was within arm's reach, he snatched the bread with a surprising quickness and scurried back a few feet, holding it like a treasure. He took a small, cautious bite, his eyes never leaving hers. Lena smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. She broke off another piece for herself. They ate in a shared, comfortable silence, the lost boy and the waitress, under the lazy afternoon sun. She didn't press him for his name or where his parents were. The first step was always safety. The second was trust. The questions could wait. She was just about to ask him if he wanted some water when the world ended. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with the whisper-quiet arrival of 3 black sedans. They pulled up to the mouth of the alley with a synchronized, predatory grace that was utterly alien to the neighborhood. The sun glinted off chrome so polished it looked wet. Doors opened in unison, and men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They moved with a chilling economy of motion, their bodies tense, their eyes sweeping the alley like searchlights. They weren't cops. They were something else entirely. Lena's body went cold. Her survival instinct, honed by a life that had never been easy, screamed at her. This was danger. Absolute. The back door of the center car opened. The man who stepped out was different from the others. Where they were coiled springs of aggression, he was a study in stillness. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her last 6 months' rent. His black hair was styled with a severe precision. He wasn't tall, but he occupied space as if he owned the very air within it. His gaze landed on the boy in the red shirt, and for a fraction of a second, an emotion flickered across his face, something raw and unguarded. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of carved ice. He moved toward them. He walked like the ground rearranged itself to meet his feet. His men parted for him, a silent, human sea. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes, as dark and deep as the boy's, flicking from his son to Lena. He noted the half-eaten bread in the boy's hand, then the other half in hers. "Haru," he said. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that carried an unmistakable weight of command. The boy, Haru, flinched but didn't run to him. He stayed near Lena, a silent testament to where he'd found a fleeting moment of safety. The man's gaze settled fully on Lena. It was not a curious look. It was an assessment, a dissection. He was taking her apart piece by piece, cataloging her worn-out sneakers, her faded apron, the smudge of flour on her cheek. "Who are you?" he asked. The question was flat, devoid of emotion. "My name is Lena," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She pushed herself to her feet, instinctively putting herself slightly between the man and the boy. It was a foolish, reckless gesture, and she knew it. "And what were you doing with my son?" He was lost. He looked hungry. "I gave him some of my lunch." She held up the remains of her baguette, the evidence of her simple crime. The man's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe in simple kindness. His world didn't have room for it. In his world, every action had a motive, every gesture a price. He took a step closer, and the air crackled. The scent of him reached her. Expensive cologne, a mix of cedar and something sharp, like smoke. He knelt, not taking his eyes off Lena, and spoke to his son in a rapid, low stream of Japanese. Haru shook his head, clutching the bread tighter. The man's jaw tightened. He rose to his full height again. "My son does not speak to strangers." "He didn't speak to me either," Lena said. "We just sat." One of the suited men stepped forward and murmured something to the man in Japanese. The man gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He looked back at Lena, and a decision settled in his eyes. "You will come with us," he stated. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. Lena's blood ran cold.
"No.
"I have to get back to work. Your employment here is no longer your concern." He gestured with his head, and two of his men moved to flank her. They didn't touch her, but their proximity was a cage. "You were the last person to be seen with my son before he was found. I need to know what you saw, what you heard, who you spoke to." "I didn't see anything," she insisted, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Just him. Alone." "That will be determined." He turned and walked back toward the car, Haru's small hand now firmly in his. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew she would follow. She had no choice. As his men guided her toward the waiting sedan, the door held open like the maw of a beast. She glanced back at the cafe patio. Her half-eaten bread lay on the ground, a relic from a life that had ended just minutes ago. That was when she made the mistake of looking up, catching his reflection in the tinted window of the car. He was watching her, his face a cold, unreadable mask. She was no longer Lena, the waitress. She was a loose thread in the dark, violent tapestry of his world. And he was the kind of man who didn't just pull on loose threads. He burned them. The penthouse was less a home and more a monument to cold, minimalist wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a panoramic view of the city, a glittering, indifferent god. The furniture was sparse and architectural, all sharp lines and muted colors. There was no clutter, no warmth, no sign that a child actually lived here. It was a beautiful, sterile prison high above the world. Lena sat on a leather sofa that was too large and too perfect to be comfortable. Takeda, as she'd learned his name was from one of his grim-faced lieutenants, sat opposite her in an armchair. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the alley. He just watched her, his stillness more unnerving than any threat. Haru had been whisked away by a severe-looking woman who was clearly his nanny. "Let's begin again," Takeda said finally, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "Tell me everything that happened today. From the moment you woke up." "This is insane," Lena said, finding a sliver of defiance. "I found a lost little boy and gave him some bread. That's it. You should be thanking me, not interrogating me." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, or disbelief, crossed his face. Gratitude is a luxury. Information is a necessity. Start talking. She recounted her day, the mundane details feeling absurd in this context. The bus ride, the morning rush at the cafe, the annoying customer who wanted decaf but complained it didn't taste like real coffee. As she spoke, she watched him. He listened with an unnerving focus, his eyes missing nothing. He was searching for inconsistencies, for lies. When she got to the part about finding Haru, he leaned forward slightly. "Describe his condition." "He was scared," Lena said simply. "And quiet. Very quiet." "He is always quiet," Takeda said, a thin crack in his composure. He looked past her, toward the hallway where his son had disappeared. "His mother, she was taken from us. It was a year ago. He hasn't spoken a word since." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and unexpected. It was the first piece of the man he'd given her, the first glimpse of the wound he carried. A woman he had failed to protect. A son silenced by trauma. Suddenly, his suffocating paranoia made a terrible kind of sense. He wasn't just a monster. He was a father terrified of repeating his gravest failure. Before Lena could process this, his phone buzzed. He answered it, listening intently, his face hardening into granite. He spoke in Japanese, his tone clipped and lethal. When he hung up, the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The Ishikogumi, he said, more to himself than to her. They left him there. A message. To show me they could reach him. The name meant nothing to Lena, but the venom in his voice was clear. This was a rival. An enemy. Haru getting lost wasn't an accident. It was a move in a deadly game. And she had walked right into the middle of it. One of his men, an older man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, entered the room. Takeda-sama, he began, then switched to English for her benefit. The girl. She's a liability. We can't know what she saw, who she works for. The implication was clear. A liability. A loose end. Something to be disposed of. Takeda looked at Lena, his eyes cold and calculating. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone. He was the boss again, weighing assets and risks. Her life was a number on a balance sheet. Lena's mind raced. She could beg. She could scream. Or she could use the one thing she had. Her perception. He's not just quiet, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Takeda's gaze snapped back to her. Your son. He watches everything. When I gave him the bread, he broke off the corner first. The hardest part. He tested it before he ate the rest. He's been taught to be suspicious of gifts. Takeda's expression didn't change, but the man with the scar looked at her with new interest. He trusts actions, not words, Lena continued, the pieces clicking into place. He came to me because I wasn't trying to get anything from him. I just shared what I had. He needs someone who doesn't want anything from him. Someone who isn't part of this. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room, at the men with guns hidden under their jackets. It was a gamble. A massive, life-or-death gamble. She was telling him how to reach his own son, offering a key to a lock he couldn't pick. She could have tried to run at the first opportunity, but looking at the invisible wall between that powerful man and his silent, grieving son, she had made a different choice. A choice to help. Takeda was silent for a long time. The city lights began to flicker on outside, painting the room in shades of gold and blue. Leave us, he said to his man. The man bowed and retreated. They were alone again. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. Lena's heart pounded. She had either just saved her own life or sealed her fate. Takeda rose and walked to the window, his back to her. You are observant, he said, his voice flat. It is a dangerous quality. He turned around. You will stay here. You will not be a prisoner, but you will not leave. You will spend time with Haru. You will be watched. If you are what you say you are, a waitress who is in the wrong place at the wrong time, you'll be an asset. If you are not, he left the thread unfinished.
It was more potent that way.
Later that evening, the nanny brought a distraught Haru to the living room. He'd had a nightmare. He wouldn't let anyone touch him. He stood in the middle of the vast room, a small, trembling island. Takeda stood helplessly in the doorway, a king powerless in his own castle. His men kept their distance. Lena slid off the sofa and sat on the floor, crossing her legs. She didn't say anything. She didn't move toward him. She simply made herself small and non-threatening. After a few minutes, Haru's trembling subsided. He looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He slowly walked over and sat down on the floor a few feet away from her. He still didn't speak, but he had chosen his anchor in the storm. Lena risked a glance at Takeda. He was watching them, his face a complex mask of pain, frustration, and something else she couldn't name. As she looked back at the boy, Takeda moved. He came and knelt behind her, ostensibly to check on his son. As he did, his hand brushed against her arm. The contact was brief, a ghost of a touch, but it sent a jolt of heat through her. It was an accident. It had to be. But when she looked up, his eyes met hers over his son's head. The silence was a conversation. It was a shared breath in a world that was trying to suffocate them both. It was the first, terrifying thread of a connection she knew she should sever. But she couldn't. The illusion of safety shattered 3 days later. Lena had fallen into a strange routine. Mornings were spent with Haru, drawing or building elaborate structures with blocks in a designated playroom. He still hadn't spoken, but he would occasionally take her hand, his small fingers a warm weight in hers. Takeda was a ghost, a presence she felt more than saw, always watching from a distance. The tension between them was a constant, low hum, a wire-pulled taut. They were in the main living area, the afternoon sun slanting through the massive windows. Haru was tracing the patterns in the marble floor with his finger, just a few feet from the glass. Lena was watching him, a small smile on her face, when a sound like a whip crack echoed through the room. Simultaneously, a spiderweb of cracks erupted on the window pane, right where Haru's head had been a second before. Takeda moved faster than she thought humanly possible. He was a blur of dark motion, crossing the vast room in an instant. He scooped up Haru with one arm and tackled Lena with the other, driving them both to the floor behind the solid mass of the sofa. His body was a shield over them, hard and unyielding. Glass rained down onto the marble floor with a sound like 1,000 tiny bells. Lena's breath was trapped in her lungs. All she could feel was the solid weight of him, the frantic beat of his heart against her back, the scent of cedar and smoke now laced with adrenaline. For one horrifying second, she thought he'd been hit. Fear, sharp and primal, clawed at her throat, not just for herself, or for Haru, but for him. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear. His men were already swarming, weapons drawn, barking orders in Japanese. He was not hurt, but the proximity, the raw, protective force of his actions, seared itself into her mind. This was who he was. Not just a cold man in a suit, but a predator who would kill, or die, to protect his own. And in that moment, he had included her in that circle of protection. They were moved that night, spirited away to a discreet safe house in a different part of the city. It was comfortable but fortified, a cage of a different design. The attack had changed everything. The enemy wasn't just sending messages anymore. They were aiming to kill. Takeda was a man possessed. He needed to know who gave the sniper his location. His men brought in a captured soldier from the Ishikawa-gumi, a young man with defiant eyes and a split lip. They took him to the basement. Lena could hear the muffled sounds of the interrogation, the sharp thud of fists against flesh. It made her stomach churn. An hour later, Takeda came upstairs, his knuckles bruised. "He won't talk," he snarled, his control fraying. "He'll die before he gives up his boss." Lena looked at him, at the violence simmering just beneath his skin. The old Lena, the waitress from the daily grind, would have been repulsed, terrified. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had been covered in the glass of his war, had felt his heartbeat against her spine. "Let me talk to him," she said. Takeda stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "He is a killer, not a customer who wants a different kind of coffee." "You're trying to break him with pain," she said, her voice even. "But he's expecting pain. It's part of his code. You have to use something else." She didn't know where these words were coming from, only that they felt true. He considered her, his dark eyes searching her face. He was desperate. He gave a curt nod. They went to the basement. The young soldier was tied to a chair, bleeding but unbroken. Takeda and his men stood in the shadows. Lena pulled up another chair and sat in front of him. She didn't ask about his boss. She didn't ask about the sniper. She'd overheard his name earlier. "Kenshin," she said softly. "I saw the picture in your wallet when they searched you. Your daughter." His defiant mask cracked. "Just for a second. They told her you were on a special assignment, right?" Lena continued, her voice gentle, conversational. "That you're a hero. That you're doing this to protect her," she was guessing, weaving a story from a single photograph. "But they lied. The Ishikawas. They sent you on a suicide mission. And when Takeda's men send your body back in pieces, they're going to tell your family you were a traitor, that you talked, that you disgraced them. Your daughter will grow up with a traitor for a father. It was a brutal, calculated lie. A violation. She was taking his loyalty and twisting it into a weapon against him. She was using his love for his child to break him. Kenshin's face crumpled. A single tear traced a path through the blood and grime on his cheek. He started talking, the words spilling out in a torrent of Japanese. Lena didn't understand the language, but she understood the sound of a man breaking. She had done that. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, stepping from the light into the gray shadows of Takeda's world. She felt sick, but also a grim sense of victory. When it was over, Takeda dismissed his men. He and Lena were alone in the sterile silence of the safe house kitchen. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and pushed one toward her. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice rough. "Everyone has something they're afraid to lose," she said, staring into the amber liquid. She couldn't meet his eyes. He moved to stand beside her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You should be afraid of me, Lena." She finally looked up at him. His face was inches from hers, his dark eyes intense. "I am," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she'd ever said. "But that's not all I am." The admission hung between them, dangerous and real. He was more than a monster to her now, and she was more than a witness to him. "I told myself, staying here, it was about survival," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "That I was just waiting for a chance to leave. I was lying to myself." His gaze dropped to her lips. The space between them felt electric, a vacuum begging to be filled. He lifted a hand, his bruised knuckles gently brushing a stray curl from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. "The Ishikawas know who you are," he said, his voice a low rasp. "They sent a message to your old cafe. They know your name. Leaving is no longer an option. You are a target now. Because of me." He was giving her the truth, a truth as brutal as the one she'd used in the basement. He was chaining her to him not with threats, but with the shared reality of their danger. He said her name, Lena, and it sounded different from his lips. Not a name, but a claim. And she did not pull away. The final confrontation was inevitable. The information from the captured soldier gave Takeda the location of Ishikawa's base of operations. He spent 2 days planning, his movements precise and deadly. He was preparing for war, and Lena saw the lethal strategist behind the cold facade. He arranged for her and Haru to be moved to a 3rd location, a place he swore was impenetrable, while he led the assault. "You will be safe there," he told her the night before he was set to leave. He stood before her, dressed in a simple black shirt and trousers, the tailored suits stripped away. He seemed younger, more vulnerable, yet more dangerous. "I will end this. Then we will decide what comes next." But as he spoke, Lena felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The plan was too simple, too clean. Ishikawa had shown he was willing to target a child. He knew Takeda's greatest weakness. A direct assault on Takeda felt like a feint. The real target wouldn't be the king, it would be the prince. "He's not going to wait for you there," she said suddenly. "The base is a distraction. He's coming for Haru. He's coming for us." Takeda frowned. "My intelligence is certain." "Your intelligence is based on a man I broke by threatening his family," she shot back. "Ishikawa knows you'll come for him. He's counting on it. He's using your own code of honor against you. While you're attacking an empty building, he'll be at the new safe house." He looked at her, his tactical mind warring with the stark logic of her words. He saw the truth in her eyes. He was too close to it, too driven by the need for revenge. She, the outsider, could see the board more clearly. There was no time to change the plan, no time to recall his men. Ishikawa's attack would come while Takeda's forces were halfway across the city. They would be alone. "I will stay," Takeda said, his voice grim. "No," Lena said, her mind racing. "If you stay, you fall into his other trap. He wins either way. Go. Do what you have to do. We'll handle it here." "We." He looked at the handful of guards he'd left behind. "Not enough." I have an idea, she said. She wasn't a warrior. She couldn't fire a gun. But she was observant. She had spent the last day studying the blueprints of the new safe house, a habit born of anxiety. She knew its systems. When the attack came, it was swift and brutal. The alarms blared. The sounds of a firefight erupted from the perimeter. Takeda's guards were good, but they were outnumbered. It was only a matter of time. Lena grabbed Haru, pulling him into the central security room, the house's electronic heart. She could hear the invaders breaching the outer doors. They were coming. With trembling hands, she slammed her fist on the emergency lockdown panel. Steel shutters crashed down over the windows and doors, sealing them in. Then she activated the fire suppression system in the West Wing, where most of the fighting was. Halon gas flooded the corridors, choking and disorienting. It wasn't lethal, but it would buy time. She rerouted the remaining power to fortify the door to their room, creating a final bastion. She held Haru close, the boy silent, but clinging to her fiercely. They listened as the attackers tried to breach their door, the steel groaning under the assault. She had done all she could. Now they could only wait. The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. Then a new sound. The security door hissed open. Lena scrambled to her feet, putting herself in front of Haru. She braced herself. Takeda stood in the doorway. He was alone. His clothes were torn, and a dark stain was spreading across his side, but he was standing. His eyes found hers across the room, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like seeing the sun for the first time. He ignored the dead and the dying in the hallway. He walked straight to her.
He didn't speak.
He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. His gaze was raw, stripped of all pretense. He will not touch what is mine, he said, his voice thick with a possessive, absolute certainty. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was an oath, a statement of fact in his world. She was his.
His to protect.
His to keep. He acknowledged her then, in a way that mattered more than any words of affection. He saw her, not as a witness or a liability or an asset, but as the person who had seen the board, saved his son, and held the center when his world was collapsing. A cost had been paid. The knife wound in his side was deep, a permanent reminder of the price of this victory. His empire was secure, but it had been bought with blood, and with her innocence. Weeks bled into months. The world outside the windows of the penthouse continued on, but it was no longer her world. She no longer worked at the cafe. She no longer rode the bus. Her old life was a ghost. One evening, she was sitting by the window, sketching the city skyline in a charcoal pad. It was something she used to do, a piece of the old Lena she was trying to reclaim. Haru was beside her, quietly drawing a picture of a little boy in a red shirt holding hands with a woman. He had started speaking again, in small, hesitant whispers, but only to her. Takeda entered the room, silent as always. He had discarded his suit jacket, and the stark white of his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He moved with a slight stiffness, the wound in his side still healing. He came to stand behind her chair, looking down at her drawing.
He didn't speak.
He simply placed a hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was familiar, solid. It was no longer a cage, but an anchor. She didn't flinch from the touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned back slightly, a silent acceptance, her head resting against him for just a moment. She knew what he was, a killer, a king in a violent, merciless world. And she knew what she had become, something more than a waitress, something other than a victim. She had made a choice in that alley, a simple act of kindness that had unraveled her life and woven it into his. And now, she was making another.
To stay.
To accept the gilded cage, not as a prison, but as the strange, dangerous, and unwavering center of her new reality. The city glittered below, beautiful and oblivious, but the only world that mattered now was right here, in the quiet touch of a monster's hand on her shoulder.